Welcome to JGTCR, I'm Cope, and today we are tuning the Amuse NISMO 380RS. Let's get into it. In factory trim, driving the 380RS is like trying to control a stubborn donkey. The revs build so slowly it feels like it takes forever to get to the gear change. When we do get to the end of the rev range, if we do not shift gears at the absolute peak RPM, the vehicle bogs down, losing us copious amounts of time. The 380RS must be driven aggressively, consistently to get good times out on the track. It is headstrong and determined to make us drive it the way it wants us to. It's the 380RS's way or the highway. When it comes to handling, there are no major issues. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just decent. Under braking, the vehicle is excellent. The brakes are well matched for the application, and there are no issues of balance or locking up. Let's collect our time. (7 minutes 35.5 seconds). It's tune time. For this tune, we went with a more firm rear end. This is due to the weight shift throwing the tail end out into a drift. We ran a softer front end and dipped the nose via the body height adjustment to deal with some understeer issues we created by firming up the rear end. Let's head out to the track and see how it performs. The default settings for the Amuse NISMO 380RS when modified are considerably solid. It does have a tendency to understeer, but it can be lived with. However, after tuning, the handling improved tenfold. There is a greater degree of precision, and the vehicle does exactly as it's told. There is more power to play with, and the power delivery is spot on for the application. It makes the 380RS more lively and awake on the circuit. It rarely wheel spins unless pushing too hard, and does not tend to slide or drift, just wheel spins for a few seconds and then grips back up. Our braking has had a very nice bump in the stats. We are far more stable under brakes and are able to turn and brake at the same time, within reason of course. Let's jump ahead and collect our time. 6 minutes 34.5 seconds. And now the drift tune. There was not much needed to make the 380RS drift. The toe angle at the rear was set to 0.25 out, and we reduced the rear downforce to 300. Last but not least, we changed our tyres to comfort hards. And that is it. Out to Suzuka we go. They say that the simple things in life are often the best, and the Amuse NISMO 380RS is evidence of just that. With only a few minor adjustments to our race tune, we now have a well-balanced drift car. It can be thrown into corners relatively hard, and very quickly it settles into a nice controllable drift. Adjustments to the drift and drift angle are effortless, as the 380RS responds very well to inputs. It is extremely predictable and very easy to place on the track. The power and power delivery is surprisingly well matched for the application. Not too much power, but enough to get the job done. The surprising part is how peaky in nature the engine is, yet how stable the vehicle is. All of these traits mentioned are perfectly suited for drifting in tandem, drifting in trains, and pretty much any drift application. The Amuse NISMO 380RS is highly recommended as a drift car. And now it's engine swap time. With only the engine swap in place, the 380RS becomes a tank. It feels very heavy, especially up front, and seems to understeer going into almost every turn, which is the exact opposite of what happens on corner exit. As we apply the throttle, the 380 likes to snap into oversteer. The drift can be controlled and is fun, but is not quite what we're after. This can be helped by a healthy dose of throttle modulation, but it's a fine line between screaming out of a corner and drifting out of it. When it comes to brakes, they lock up almost instantly. So brake early and brake softly. The best approach is to drive like we are in fuel-saving mode. Short shift through turns, use slow sweeping lines, modulate the throttle and only full throttle in straight lines, and brake early and easy. Let's collect our time. 7 minutes 11.6 seconds. Let's get to tuning. While the 380RS with the engine swap is front heavy and likes to understeer, it also loves lifting the nose at every possible opportunity. As such, we have spent quite a bit of time keeping the nose on the ground. Our body height adjustment is lower at the front than the rear, and we have also added 30 points of ballast at a positioning of -35 over the front wheels. Additionally, we have reduced our rear downforce to 420 from maximum. While this does increase our chances of wheel spin, it reduces our chances of having Mark Webber moments out on the field. Our differential settings have been reduced to a near minimum. This is due to the sheer amounts of power being sent to the rear wheels, and unfortunately we cannot stabilize the rear and stop the front from lifting at the same time. And when it comes to choosing between putting power down to the ground or being able to steer, the choice should almost always be steering. The rest of our tuning suspension is par for the course, with the exception of the front camber, which is set to 5.5. This is to help counter the additional pressure we have added to the front end and hopefully nets us a bit more handling. Let's head back out to the Nürburgring. It should be of no surprise that the Amuse NISMO 380RS with the engine swap, once tuned, performs much better. However, it should be noted that the factory size wheels are a hindrance to performance. So for best results, reduce the diameter as much as possible and do not use a wide offset. This seems to be a common theme with the Amuse vehicles, and unfortunately it means that the tyres make contact with the body, leaving us scrambling for control in the most inopportune times. When it comes to power delivery, it is very meaty and aggressive. We should always be consciously aware that the vehicle can snap oversteer at almost any moment. This does make for a challenging drive, but it's not hard work, it's fun. But if we are looking to lay down some fast lap times, mastery of throttle modulation is absolutely essential. Let's collect our time. 6 minutes 17.7 seconds. On to the drift tune. Some extreme settings for an extreme car. The body height is lower at the rear than the front, giving us a squatting stance. Our rear suspension settings are softer than usual to try and deal with the power and how aggressively it gets put down to the ground. The camber angle, both front and rear, have been set to a max of 6. This is to help us gain directional drift. The differential gear has acceleration and braking sensitivity both turned down as far as they will go, while the initial torque is cranked up as high as it will go. Again, this is to deal with the amount of power and how the power is being sent to the back wheels. Our downforce settings are maxed to try and keep the car pinned to the ground. And the MVP of this build is the 200 kilos of ballast we have put over the rear wheels at a ballast positioning of 35. Once again, this is addressing the power and power delivery. Let's go drifting. The Amuse NISMO 380RS with the engine swap is a positively brutal drift car, and not to be trifled with or underestimated in any way. It cooks tyres in an instant and bellows plumes of smoke consistently as we shake and bake our way around the drift circuit. This monstrosity is stable but frothing at the bit to break free of the chains that bind it. It can be drifted well, but we must stay vigilant on inputs to maintain control. There is so much power being delivered to the rear wheels that all it takes is a touch too much power and it's all over. The 380RS is not an agile drifter, so we must plan our moves accordingly and be very smooth on our inputs. If we are too aggressive with our throws into turns or our transitions, we can find ourselves spinning off track in the blink of an eye. This is both a challenging and rewarding drift car, but definitely not for the faint of heart. The first impression the Amuse NISMO 380RS gives is that it is lazy and stubborn. It is moody about the way it is driven and forces us to drive the way it wants us to. When modified, it springs to life and decides to obey our every command, a more lively version of itself a world away from where it once was. In the drift arena, it fares well as a median entry, an accessible drift car for drivers of almost any level. When engine swapped, it becomes difficult to contend with, oversteering and understeering at every turn, and while somewhat fun, not easy to drive fast. Once tuned, it becomes a lethal weapon that runs the ragged edge of control, fun, and certain death. As a drift car, it is equally as dangerous, just with better angles and a lot more smoke, and is better suited to advanced drifters as it is a very fine line one must walk to find success. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing.